On the night of March 11, 1989, at 11 o'clock in the evening, a 59-year-old nun named Sister Agnes Brennan pressed the last wooden panel into place against the back wall of her convent room, stepped back, and looked at what she had built. It was a false wall. She had built it herself. Alone, over the course of one weekend, while the rest of the convent slept, or prayed, or moved through the quiet routines of institutional life that had governed every hour of Sister Agnes's existence for the past 31 years. She had planned it for 6 months. She had purchased the materials in small amounts from 3 different hardware stores, paying cash, on days when she was running other errands, so that no single purchase would seem unusual. She had practiced the joinery on scrap wood in the basement utility room on Tuesday evenings when it was empty. She had measured the space behind her room's built-in wardrobe 27 times before she was satisfied. She was not a carpenter. She was a 60-year-old woman who had spent her adult life administering the records office of a Catholic diocese in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She wore a gray habit and low-heeled shoes and kept a rosary on her desk. She was known, among the sisters who lived and worked alongside her, as a person of exceptional precision, organized, quiet, self-contained. Not warm, exactly, but reliable. The kind of person you trusted with things that mattered. Which is exactly why they had trusted her with everything. She reached behind the panel and placed the first folder inside. Then she pressed the panel flush to the wall. Then she went to bed. She was asleep before midnight. She did not look afraid. She did not look conflicted. She looked, by every account from people who knew her, exactly as she always looked, calm, deliberate, and entirely in possession of herself. She had been building toward this moment for 15 years, and she would keep building for 12 more. Before we go any further, before we walk through the 27 years that led to that wall and the 12 years that followed it, you need to understand something about what Sister Agnes Brennan actually held. When the FBI opened the boxes she brought them in 2001, they found 23,000 pages of documents. 23,000. The Diocese of Milwaukee, when subpoenaed by a grand jury in 1998, had handed over 6,000 pages and declared the records complete. Sister Agnes had been quietly, systematically, meticulously copying and concealing the other 17,000 for 27 years. Inside those boxes were the personnel files of 41 priests. Not their public service records. Their real files. The ones that documented complaints, allegations, internal investigations, canonical proceedings that went nowhere, correspondence between bishops that used words like reassignment and pastoral transfer and change of ministry in contexts that made the meaning unmistakable. There were 214 victim statements, some typed, some handwritten, some on diocesan letterhead that had been used as scratch paper because the person writing had nothing else to hand. Some dated as far back as 1961. Some from children as young as 7 years old, writing in the uneven handwriting of very young children, describing things that very young children should never have language for. There were transfer orders, 38 of them, moving priests from one parish to another, from one city to another, from one state to another in every case, within 3 to 6 months of a documented complaint. In every case, to a new assignment where the receiving parish was told nothing. In every case, signed by a bishop who had also signed the internal document acknowledging the complaint. The same signature, on both documents, filed in the same office. The right hand and the left hand belonging to the same body. And there were memos. Internal correspondence between diocesan leadership spanning 3 decades, in language that ranged from cautious bureaucratic euphemism to something so direct, in certain moments that federal prosecutors would later describe reading them as a physical experience. One memo, dated April 1978, from a vicar general to a bishop, read as follows: Father M. has been the subject of 3 separate complaints in the past 14 months. I recommend immediate reassignment to the Kenosha parishes. The families in question have agreed to confidentiality. The matter is resolved. The matter is resolved. 3 complaints. 14 months. Immediate reassignment. The families have agreed to confidentiality. The matter is resolved. Sister Agnes had a copy of that memo. She had had it since 1978. She had placed it in a folder marked with a priest's name and a sequence number, and she had filed it behind the wall, a wall she had not yet built, because in 1978 the wall was still 11 years in the future. In 1978 she was still deciding. We need to go back further to understand that. Agnes Mary Brennan was born in 1930 in a working-class Irish Catholic neighborhood on the north side of Milwaukee. She was the third of 5 children of a machinist named Patrick Brennan and his wife Catherine, who sang in the church choir every Sunday and kept a picture of Pope Pius X above the kitchen table. The church was not a background element of Agnes Brennan's childhood. It was the architecture of it. It was the framework inside which everything else occurred: school, community, identity, moral imagination. The entire vocabulary through which a person understood who they were and what the world asked of them. She entered the Sisters of St. Francis of Assisi in 1950, at the age of 20. She took her vows in 1953. She was assigned to administrative work within the diocese almost immediately, because her superiors recognized early that she had an unusual gift for organization, for the management of complex documentary systems, for seeing how information should be structured and how structures should be maintained. She was not brilliant in the way that draws attention. She was brilliant in the way that makes institutions function. By 1963, she was running the diocesan records office. She was 33 years old. She was given access to everything. Everything, in Catholic diocesan administration, the records office is not a peripheral function. It is the institutional memory. Every canonical proceeding, every personnel action, every correspondence with Rome, every complaint formally received and formally processed, all of it passes through the records office. All of it is held there. The person running that office knows, by definition, everything the institution knows. For 15 years, Sister Agnes knew. And she kept the records as she was supposed to. She maintained the filing systems. She responded to requests. She processed incoming correspondence. She did her job with the precision that everyone expected of her, in the institution she had given her life to, in the organization that was the entire architecture of her moral world. And the files kept arriving. In 1972, a mother came to the diocesan offices to file a formal complaint against a priest named Father Daniel Schreiber. Sister Agnes was not present for the meeting. But 2 weeks later, the resulting documentation passed through her office. She read it, as she read everything carefully, completely, because that was what her job required. She filed it in Father Schreiber's personnel folder. She noted the date. She moved on to the next document. In 1973, a second complaint arrived regarding Father Schreiber. She filed it. In 1974, a transfer order arrived for Father Schreiber, moving him from his current parish in Milwaukee's west side to a parish in Racine. The transfer order made no reference to the 2 complaints. Sister Agnes filed it alongside the complaints in the same folder. She held the folder for a long moment. Then, she went to the copying machine. She copied the 3 documents. She placed the originals back in Father Schreiber's folder. She put the copies in a plain manila envelope. She took the envelope home to her convent room that evening. She put it at the back of her desk drawer. She has never, to any person on record, explained exactly what she felt in that moment. There is no diary. There is no letter. There is no testimony in which she describes the interior experience of what she decided in 1974. We have only the action itself. The copies. The envelope. The desk drawer. She was 44 years old. She had been a nun for 24 years. The church had been the total context of her adult existence, and she had just quietly, without telling anyone, decided not to trust it, not with these. Over the next 15 years, from 1974 to 1989, when the wall was built, Sister Agnes created a parallel filing system. Alongside her official records, she maintained private copies of every document she judged to belong to a category she had defined, internally and without reference to any external standard, as things that should not disappear. Transfer orders accompanied by complaints. Memos acknowledging allegations and recommending silence. Correspondence with bishops in other dioceses that suggested a receiving parish had been given incomplete information about an incoming priest. Canonical proceedings that had been opened, documented, and then quietly closed without action or record of resolution. She did not copy everything. She was precise. She was selective. She was not building an archive of the institution's general failings. She was building a specific record of a specific category of decision, the decisions the institution made when it knew a priest had harmed a child and chose to move him rather than stop him. The criteria were clear in her own mind. She never articulated them to anyone. She simply applied them, document by document, year by year, with the same precision she applied to everything else. She stored the copies first in desk drawers. Then, as the volume grew, in boxes under her bed. Then, in 1987, when the boxes became too numerous to conceal effectively, she began planning the wall. She spent 6 months on the design. She spent 3 months acquiring materials. She built it over 1 weekend in March 1989, alone, while the convent was quiet, and she moved everything into it 15 years of copies. Organized by priest name, cross-referenced by date, maintained with the same meticulous care she brought to the official records. Then she pressed the last panel into place. Then she went to bed. For the next 12 years, the wall grew. Documents continued to arrive in her office. Her criteria continued to apply. The parallel system continued to expand behind the false wall in her convent room, while the official system she maintained for the diocese was praised by auditors who reviewed it in 1985 and again in 1991 as a model of diocesan record management. She received a commendation from the bishop in 1992. She accepted it, thanked him, and returned to her office. She had files on him too. In 1993, the first major public wave of Catholic clergy abuse cases broke nationally. The Diocese of Milwaukee, like dioceses across the country, entered a period of intense legal and media scrutiny. Sister Agnes watched this unfold with the particular attention of someone who understood exactly how the institution handled scrutiny, which is to say, she understood what would be offered and what would be withheld. She did not approach anyone. She did not signal anything. She maintained her records, official and private, with identical precision. In 1996, she reached the mandatory retirement age for administrative staff of the diocese. She was 66 years old. She had managed the records office for 33 years. The diocese held a small ceremony. The bishop spoke about her decades of dedicated service. Several of her fellow sisters attended. There was cake. She retired from her administrative position. She remained in residence at the convent. She retained, as part of the terms of her retirement, a small office adjacent to the records room, a courtesy extended to long-serving administrators, to allow them to complete transition work and remain connected to the institution they had served. This was standard practice. It was expected. It was entirely unexamined. It also meant she continued to have access to the records. She used it twice in the years following her retirement. Both times, she copied documents that had arrived after her departure and that met her criteria. Both times, she added them to the wall. In 1998, a Milwaukee County grand jury opened an investigation into clergy sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. The investigation issued subpoenas for diocesan records. The diocese, represented by its legal counsel, responded by producing 6,000 pages of documentation. Sister Agnes read the news coverage of the subpoena response. She sat in her room for one evening. She went to evening prayers. She ate dinner with the other sisters. She went back to her room. She began going through the wall. It took her 3 weeks to organize what was there into a format suitable for presentation. She created an index, a complete catalog of every document, organized by priest name, date range, document type, and what she classified as severity category. A classification system she had developed herself over 27 years and had never written down until now. The index alone ran to 47 pages. When she was finished, she had 17 boxes, neatly packed, clearly labeled. The index on top. She called the FBI on a Thursday morning in February 2001. She identified herself. She said she had documents relevant to the clergy abuse investigation in Milwaukee. She said she wanted to bring them in. She was told someone would call her back within 48 hours. An agent named Robert Calloway called her back in 4 hours. She met him the following Tuesday at the FBI field office on East Kilbourne Avenue. She arrived by taxi. She had the 17 boxes. She had arranged for a second taxi with a larger trunk. She carried 2 boxes herself. She let the driver carry the others. She sat across from Agent Calloway in a conference room, and she watched him open the first box. She watched him read the index. She watched his expression as he understood what he was looking at. He looked up at her. He said, "Sister, how long have you had these?" She said, "Since 1974. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Why are you bringing them now?" She said, "The diocese told the grand jury the records were complete." A pause. She said, "They weren't complete." That is, as far as any record shows, the closest Sister Agnes Brennan ever came to explaining herself. The diocese told the grand jury the records were complete. They weren't complete. She had the rest. 27 years of private archive. 15 years of wall. 17 boxes. 23,000 pages. And that, delivered in 2 sentences in a federal conference room to a man who had not finished processing the first box. Agent Calloway would later testify that he had been in public corruption and institutional fraud investigations for 14 years. He said that in 14 years, he had never had a witness walk through a door with what Sister Agnes brought into that room. He said the index alone represented a level of organizational sophistication that rivaled anything his own office produced professionally. He said he asked her, at the end of their first meeting, how she had maintained the system for that long, how she had kept the organization, the cross-referencing, the consistent classification over 27 years. She said, "The same way you maintain any filing system. You apply consistent criteria, and you don't let it fall behind." She took a taxi back to the convent. She went to evening prayers. What followed, over the next 3 years, was the most consequential clergy abuse prosecution in Wisconsin history. The 23,000 pages Sister Agnes had preserved became the documentary backbone of a federal investigation that named 41 priests, traced institutional decision-making through 3 decades and 4 bishops, and demonstrated with documentary precision that the transfer system, the deliberate movement of accused priests to new assignments, had been not an occasional administrative failing, but a consistent, documented, policy-level response to allegations. Not the failure of individual actors. A system. The memos proved it. The transfer orders proved it. The timing complaint received, transfer ordered, 37 times in 30 years proved it. 11 priests were convicted. Of those, 8 received prison sentences. 3 received plea agreements that included mandatory removal from ministry. 3 additional priests died before prosecution could be completed 2 of age, 1 by suicide, 3 weeks after he was informed the files existed. The diocesan legal response to the discovery of the 17 boxes went through 4 phases, which prosecutors later documented in their own filings. Phase 1. Denial. The diocese's initial statement claimed the documents Sister Agnes produced were duplicates of materials already provided. This claim lasted 9 days, until federal prosecutors compared the contents item by item and demonstrated that fewer than 400 of the 23,000 pages appeared in the original 6,000-page production. Phase 2. Jurisdictional challenge. The diocese argued that canonical documents correspondence governed by church law were outside the scope of the civil subpoena. This argument was rejected by the Federal District Court in a ruling that drew on legal precedents from 3 other states. Phase 3. Cooperation. Facing the totality of the evidentiary situation, the diocese entered into a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. The current archbishop met with the U.S. attorney and provided additional access to diocesan systems. Phase 4. Public statement. The archbishop issued a statement acknowledging that the diocese's earlier representation of its records as complete had been, and this is the word the statement used, inadvertent. Inadvertent 23,000 pages. Inadvertent. Sister Agnes, when informed by Agent Calloway of the diocese's characterization, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I know." And that was all. The prosecutions produced something beyond the convictions themselves. In the course of the trial proceedings, the transfer documents and accompanying memos were entered into public record. They were read. They were reported on. They formed the basis of legislative advocacy in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota, 3 states whose diocesan governance structures were most directly implicated by the geographic scope of the transfers documented in Sister Agnes's files. Wisconsin passed mandatory reporting legislation for religious institutions in 2003. Illinois strengthened its statute of limitations for civil clergy abuse claims in 2004. Minnesota's legislative reform, the most sweeping of the 3, directly cited the Milwaukee documentation in its findings of fact when it passed its Child Victims Act in 2013. 3 states. New law. Because a woman in a gray habit with low-heeled shoes had quietly been operating a copying machine for 27 years. Throughout the prosecution period from 2001 to 2004, when the last of the 11 cases was resolved, Sister Agnes cooperated fully with federal investigators. She answered questions. She explained her filing system. She identified documents. She clarified the classification criteria she had applied. She never retained a lawyer. She was never charged with any offense. She was never called as a trial witness. Because prosecutors determined that the documents were self-explanatory, and that calling a 71-year-old nun to testify would create a sympathy dynamic, they preferred not to introduce into proceedings that were already complicated. She gave 3 formal interviews to federal agents. In none of them did she express anything that could be characterized as pride, or anger, or grief, or relief. She answered questions. She was precise. She was complete. She corrected an agent once when he misread a date in a document, not forcefully, just the way you correct a mistake in a record. Because accuracy matters. She did not speak to the press. She issued no statement. She declined, through the convent's Mother Superior, 2 requests for interviews from national news organizations. The Mother Superior, when asked by a reporter what Sister Agnes had said when she learned of the interview requests, said she had said, "No thank you." She returned to her room at the convent. She put her rosary on the desk. She went to evening prayers. In the years following the prosecution, Sister Agnes lived in the convent with the same quiet routine she had maintained for decades. She attended Mass. She ate in the common dining room. She spent time in the convent garden, where she had tended the same section of herb beds for 30 years. She read. She prayed. She did not discuss what she had done. Not with her fellow sisters. Not with the Mother Superior. Not with anyone. One sister, a woman named Sister Marguerite Dolan, who had lived in the same convent for 20 years, gave an interview to a Catholic news service in 2009. She said she had known Agnes for 2 decades and had never, not once, heard her speak about the files or the prosecution or the false wall. She said Agnes was not a person who spoke about herself. If you asked her how she was, she would tell you about the garden. That was Agnes. She said that after the news broke in 2001, after the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel ran the story with the detail about the false wall, the detail that drew national attention, the image of a 71-year-old woman who had built a hiding place inside her convent room and kept it secret for 12 years, she had gone to Agnes's room and knocked on the door. Agnes had opened it. Sister Marguerite said she had not known what to say, so she had said, "Agnes, why didn't you tell anyone?" She said Agnes had looked at her for a moment. Then she had said, "Who would I have told?" And she had closed the door. That question, "Who would I have told?" is the most important sentence in this entire story. It is more important than any of the memos. More important than the transfer orders. More important than the prosecutorial filings and the legislative findings and the changes to state law. Because what Sister Agnes Brennan understood in 1974 when she made the first copies, and understood in 1989 when she built the wall, and understood in 2001 when she carried 17 boxes into a federal building in Milwaukee, is something that every person who has ever tried to report institutional wrongdoing through institutional channels eventually learns. You cannot report the institution to itself. The complaint goes to the office. The office files it. The office decides what to do with it. And the office's primary interest, not its stated interest, not the interest it would describe if you asked, but its actual, operational, demonstrated interest is its own continuity, its own integrity, in the original sense of the word, its intactness, its wholeness, its survival as the thing it has always been. When a complaint arrives, the institution does not ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "What happens to us if this is true?" And the answer, in the file Sister Agnes had been reading for 15 years before she built the wall, was always the same. The answer was a transfer order, a confidentiality agreement, a memo with the phrase "the matter is resolved," a family that had been persuaded to stay quiet, a priest in a new parish, in a new city, where no one had been told anything. The matter is resolved. Who would she have told? She had tried to imagine it in 1974 when she held the folder for the first time. She had tried to construct the scenario. She would go to the Vicar General. She would say, "I have noticed a pattern in these transfer orders. I believe the transfers are being used to conceal complaints. I believe this is systematic." And the Vicar General would look at her, and he would understand exactly what she was saying. And he would say what? He would not say, "You are right, we must stop this immediately." She was certain of that. She was not naive. She was a woman who had managed institutional records for 11 years. She knew how institutions worked. She knew what they did with information that threatened them. He would say, "These are confidential canonical matters." He would say, "The Church has its own processes for addressing these concerns." He would say, "Sister, I appreciate your dedication to the integrity of our records, but this is outside your area of responsibility." He would say these things, and he would be polite, and he would thank her, and she would leave his office. And then her file would be flagged. And then she would receive a new assignment. And then someone else would be running the records office. And the copies would be gone. So she did not go to the Vicar General. She did not go to the bishop. She did not go to a lawyer, because in 1974 she did not know any lawyers and would not have known how to begin. She did not go to the police, because in 1974 the police did not investigate the church in Milwaukee, and she had no reason to believe they would. She went to the copying machine. She went to the copying machine because she understood something that legal scholars and institutional reformers have been articulating in academic language for decades. but that Sister Agnes Brennan understood in her bones that the only power available to someone who cannot report an institution to itself is the power of the record. If the record exists, it cannot be made not to have happened. If the document survives, the decision it documents is permanent. If the copies exist somewhere the institution cannot reach them, then the institution cannot make the truth disappear by reclassifying it, recontextualizing it, flagging it confidential, burying it in a canonical proceeding that closes without public record. She could not stop what was happening. She was one woman in a gray habit in a records office. She could not change the decision-making structure of an institution that had been operating in the same way for decades. She could not protect the next child who would sit in front of a priest whose file she had just read. She could not do any of that. But she could make sure it was written down. She could make sure the copies existed. She could make sure that if the moment ever came when the truth could not be contained anymore, when the world outside finally pressed hard enough against the institutional wall that the wall had to come down, she could make sure that when it came down, there was something on the other side. Not the institution's version. Not the 6,000 pages of processed, managed, legally reviewed documentation that had been handed to the grand jury with a statement that it was complete. The truth. 23,000 pages of it. Filed by a woman who applied consistent criteria and did not let it fall behind. There is a particular kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. It does not announce itself, it does not seek recognition. It does not feel to the person practicing it like bravery, because bravery suggests a moment of decision, a threshold crossed, a clear choice between the safe thing and the right thing. What Sister Agnes Brennan practiced was not bravery in that sense. It was something quieter and, in some ways, more difficult. It was the daily decision to continue. Every morning for 27 years, she got up and went to her office and did her job. Every time a document arrived that met her criteria, she made the copies. Every time the file behind the wall grew, she maintained it with the same precision she brought to the official records. Every time she sat through a diocesan meeting, or attended a ceremony, or received a commendation from a bishop whose correspondence she had copied, she did not flinch. She did not tell anyone. She did not write it in a diary. She did not confide in a friend. She carried it alone for 27 years in the way that certain people carry things not as a burden but as a responsibility. Not as a secret that weighed on her, but as a duty she had accepted and would not put down. We do not know what it cost her. We cannot know. She did not say. She gave no interviews. She left no memoir. She left 17 boxes and a 47-page index and a false wall in a convent room and a rosary on a desk. And we know that when Agent Calloway asked her why she had waited until 2001 to bring the files forward 27 years after she started copying, she said the diocese had told the grand jury the records were complete. They weren't complete. She had the rest. That is the whole of it. That is her explanation. She waited until the institution had made a specific, documentable, verifiable false claim, until the lie was on record, and then she walked into a federal building with 17 boxes and made the record complete. Because that was what the records office was supposed to do. Make the record complete. She was 71 years old. She had been keeping faith with this duty since she was 44. She had not built the wall dramatically. She had not planned a heroic moment. She had simply maintained a filing system, applied consistent criteria, and waited until the moment when what she had was necessary. Then she brought it in. Then she went home. Then she went to evening prayers. The false wall is still there. The convent did not remove it after the story broke. It was sealed from the other side. Sister Agnes stayed in her room until her death in 2009. She did not move to another room. She did not seem to want to. The wall was, by then, just a wall. Its contents were gone. Its purpose had been served. She died on a Tuesday in September 2009 at the age of 79 in the convent where she had lived for 53 years. She was attended at the end by 2 sisters and the convent chaplain. Her death was quiet and without complication. Her obituary in the Catholic Herald ran to 4 paragraphs. It described her birth, her entry into the sisterhood, her decades of administrative service to the diocese, and her quiet retirement. It used the phrase quiet devotion to describe her relationship to the Church. It did not mention the wall. It did not mention the 23,000 pages. It did not mention the 11 convictions, or the 3 states that changed their laws, or the 214 victim statements that survived because she had a copying machine and a plan and 27 years of willingness to carry something no one else would touch. The institution wrote her obituary the same way it wrote its transfer orders, with everything that mattered left out. But the files exist. The files will always exist, because she made sure of it. There are people alive today, people who were 7 years old in 1978 when they wrote statements in the uneven handwriting of very young children who had their cases prosecuted, because a woman in a gray habit decided, in 1974, that if the institution would not be trustworthy with the truth, she would keep the truth herself. Not for recognition, not for justice. In the abstract sense, she did not live to see all of the legal changes her files made possible. Not out of anger, or ideology, or grievance, out of something simpler, something almost administrative in the way she practiced it. Because accuracy matters. Because the record should be complete. Because someone has to make sure the filing system doesn't fall behind. She applied consistent criteria. For 27 years. And then she put her rosary on the desk, and she went to evening prayers.